Now that we have our template made, I want to start drawing our story out. I'm going to create a new layer by holding Command-Shift-N. Just hit OK. Or you can just go to the new layer tab here. I'm going to hold down Alt or Option on a Mac and hover my cursor between the two layers, my frames layer and my layer 1. And you'll notice that my cursor changes from a hand, this little pointy finger, to the box with a arrow, and I'm going to click it when I see that icon. You'll notice that my layer changed a little bit and the image shifted over and it has that same little bendy arrow. What that's doing is it's creating a bit of a layer mask. It's using the layer underneath as a mask so that when I draw, you can see that it hides a lot of the image that would normally be outside of the lines. You see, if I click Alt again in between those lines, I can turn that on and off, and you can see the artwork over the lines. So I'm just going to have my fresh layer set up that way, and I can start my establishing shots. I want to use the reference deck that I just built constantly. So I have it loaded up here on my second monitor. Right now I'm looking at my location exteriors. I want to create an establishing shot, an extreme wide shot, something that'll give us the first kind of sociological reference to what kind of world we're living in. So since I have my big cities here, tall buildings, getting a quick idea of the shape language. Some are twisty, some are pointy, some are coastal. So I'm just going to take a quick look at that and go back in here with my brush. I'm going to start building a simple landscape as my first shot. Now, I'm keeping this one fairly simple. Just drawing boxes right now, and I'm gesturing them, freehanding some lines, holding Shift to create straight lines here in Photoshop. And I just want to infer a big old cityscape. I'm not doing anything in particular. It's not a real city. It's just kind of inspired by some. Maybe there's some cool architecture and dimension. And I just kind of want this world to feel a bit full. Now, I'm not going to fully realize this just yet. I'm just going to gesture it enough so that I get the idea. And then I can move on and always come back and refine these images. The way I like to work is, instead of working one frame at a time, I like to work on all 9 frames so that I can get a big overall picture of how the stories and the rhythm is going to play out. So just going to fill this up by adding overlapping shapes and creating a sense of depth. I'll add maybe some lines here that go in perspective that might be docks. There could be big ports here and ships that come in and out of the city. Right now, I don't know what those vehicles are going to be, so I'm just kind of loosely gesturing some vehicle shapes. I think all of this will be water, and this will be our big island city. And I'm going to move on to my next shot. I'm going to draw this from a different perspective. I want to imagine that I'm kind of flying in over the city. This is still yet another establishing shot, but a bit tighter. I'm working on the same layer. These documents can get really big really fast. So I want to kind of minimize the amount of layers that I'm using and have to keep track of. Right now I'm just thumbnailing, so I don't want to get too caught up in that detail like I mentioned before. Also, remember to Okay, on to shot 2. Let's go to our frames layer and let's lock it. Before we keep drawing, what happens is sometimes we accidentally grab the wrong layer and we draw on it, and it can become a hassle later on if we accidentally draw on our frames layer. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen by just simply locking it, clicking the lock tool here, and go back to layer 1, and let's draw our city from another vantage point. This time I'm kind of going high angle, and I'm basically just drawing shoe boxes at different heights and widths and shapes. Again, since I'm just thumbnailing this and gesturing, I'm not getting too caught up with the overall design, but I am keeping in mind some of the language that I've already set up in my first frame. So I see that I have some buildings with slopes, and some are straight, some have little twisty things. So I'm probably going to want to incorporate some of that into these shapes here, so that we realize that it's all the same place. Just going to fill in this place. Now, my perspective is far from perfect here, and at this point that's totally okay. Right now I just want to block in my shot. I can always go in and revise this, especially before I add any extra detail or rendering. So I just want to get that in there. And again, we're flying in from outside of the city, and we're going to go over the rooftops. And maybe I can use my marquee tool, M on the keyboard here, or you can see the marquee right there. Control T, transform if you want to get a bit more scale. Add a few more buildings. That's looking pretty good so far. Also, as I'm looking at it, I do want this kind of to be a city of the future. We're definitely dealing with alien life forms and space pilots, so maybe we can infer a little bit of that as well. Just going back to my first frame, I'm going to add some little dots here that might feel like some flying vehicles coming in and out of the city. And then I'll kind of do the same thing in my second frame, and I'm just going to add these floating boxes here. Maybe, something that definitely resembles more of a car shape. Maybe it has a little bit of wing. I'm not really, again, I haven't gone in and done all this vehicle design or, plan too far ahead with some of this. So I'm just kind of going in there and going off memory and things that are familiar to me. Just kind of showing this from a few different angles. The more research you get to do beforehand, the more you can pre-plan this stuff. But for storyboards, it typically isn't all that necessary, especially at the very beginning stages. We're just kind of giving people the idea of what these shots might look like and what's going to happen. But the particulars can be worked out later on, or most likely it's being worked on simultaneously by some other artist who will help fill in those gaps later on. Just tweaking some of my lines so the perspective doesn't look too off. Now again, it doesn't need to be perfect, it just kind of needs to feel right. And I'll leave this like this for now. I think we're pretty good. And I'll start really pushing into this view here. So now I'll get really close to some of my buildings. Again, I'm just drawing these shoe boxes. as you get used to drawing, you can treat this kind of like a sculpture and kind of adding and subtracting from your forms here. I really like to kind of picture this as a 3D model and imagine extruding polygons from my forms, from my primitives here. And always add, subtract. Some of the drawing 101 things that we learned back in school. Just ways to make these a bit interesting. Okay. We have our first 3 shots. We can see we're at our widest. Then what would we consider a medium long shot, and then something that's much tighter. We could see how close and intimate we're getting into our city. This applies to just to people and places. As we build up momentum towards our story, we're getting more acquainted with our city, which acts as a character unto itself. And now, for our 4th shot, I'm going to take us towards ground level. And I'm working a bit oblique here, so I'm forcing the perspective a little. Going to show our cantina storefront. Maybe this is the front door. I think I'll scale this a little bit by, again, using either the lasso tool, which is L on the keyboard, or the marquee tool, M. I'll scale that a little bit so I can get a little more of the building in there. Have some room for signage. That's the beauty of working digitally. I don't have to think too far ahead in terms of scale. I can always go in there and tweak it really quickly. I think this is going to be my sidewalk, and then this will be street. Maybe I'll have some other vehicle or something kind of whizzing by in the foreground. I'm going to plot my front door right here, and maybe even have a sign coming outward